So, and also during the 1950s was another law passed, which I might have time to talk about later, dealing with special privileges giving to clergy, members of the clergy. So Truman signed it, and every year since 1952, the President of the United States has proclaimed a National Day of Prayer. Well, in the first couple decades of that, first 3 decades or so of that, the President just picked a date. In fact, sometimes the President forgot, and it was like late December. Oh, we better proclaim the Day of Prayer. And the religious right, this was a big victory for them, and they wanted to kind of run this thing and control this National Day of Prayer and make a big deal out of it. And they have every right to have their days of prayer. And in fact, our lawsuit was not challenging them. They were hoping that the President would announce to them enough in advance so they could organize rallies in the city halls and in the county buildings and in state capitals and such. So they pressured Congress under Ronald Reagan, who of course was a great friend of state-church separation. They pressured them to make it a fixed day every year, well, a fixed Thursday, the first Thursday of every May, to be the National Day of Prayer, with the express purpose of helping religious people organize this national event. So there's a lot of smoking guns here from a legal point of view. The religious intention of the first bill, and then the religious intention and the entanglement of the second bill. Every year, since the beginning, people have complained about the National Day of Prayer. Jewish groups have complained. Non-evangelical groups have complained about it because it wasn't just a day of prayer, it was really a day for evangelical prayer. It was people like Pat Boone, people like Bill Bright and Vonette Bright with Campus Crusade for Christ, these campus proselytizers, if you know who they are. They're going around trying to convert everybody. She became the first president of, she's the wife of Bill Bright, the first president of a National Day of Prayer task force, which is now headed by a woman named Shirley Dobson. Shirley Dobson is the wife of James Dobson, who's head of the Focus on the Family in Colorado Springs, a very right-wing group. He became famous by mixing psychology with, with Christianity. And they are now one of the biggest enemies of state-church separation in our country. The National Day of Prayer Task Force, headed by his wife, is housed in the same building as the Focus on the Family. So this is really an evangelical group. In 1988, under Reagan, when the law was changed to the first Thursday of every May, it was right-wing senators and congressmen that passed the thing. Strom Thurmond, an anti-segregationist. And by the way, when it was first proposed in 1952, the member of Congress who proposed the bill for a National Day of Prayer was named Absalom Robertson, who's the father of Pat Robertson. Absalom was also another famous he was a famous segregationist. Did I say that wrong? Yeah, I said it wrong, but you know what I meant. So there really is a kind of Christian right-wing evangelical thing going on here. And people have complained, Muslim groups have complained, people who wanted to get in on the planning of it. What this National Day of Prayer Task Force has been doing then is it's been setting itself up as a kind of arm of government, basically, doing for the government, arranging and organizing this National Day of Prayer. And in fact, the law that Congress passed only calls on the President to make the proclamation, but this group has been successful in getting every single governor, all 50-plus governors of the states and territories, to go in and have this thing. They compose the proclamation, they pick the theme of it, they pick the Bible verse of it, they send it out to all these places, and which governor wants to be seen as being the state that doesn't proclaim the Day of Prayer? And mayors have done it too as well. And anybody who has any political position, any position of power, has been pressured all over the country by this task force to proclaim this National Day of Prayer. So there have been complaints from the very beginning. Members of our group have complained. We have complained officially about this National Day of Prayer because it's calling on me, a non-believer, to actively participate in a religious ritual proclaimed and organized by my government, my president telling me to do this. So when George Bush became president, he loved the National Day of Prayer Task Force. He loved those people. In fact, not only did he proclaim the National Day of Prayer, he invited them into the White House. They had these big rallies and these big meetings, and they turned out to be sort of Jesus loves me revival meetings is what they were. Very, very pro-Christian right. And even there were other moderate liberal Christians in many cities and states who wanted to be involved who were told, no, you can't. You're not the true evangelical Christian that founded our country by this task force. So they were happy. The National Day of Prayer Task Force was happy with Bush because Bush just took the whole thing and he wanted to show how much he loved the evangelical right. So obviously there's a mixing of religion and government going on here. We sued when Bush was president. We took a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the National Day of Prayer. And then Obama was elected, so we changed the names on the lawsuit. So now it's Obama and his press secretary were named. And Obama's administration, his Justice Department, decided to continue fighting it. And boy, did they make us jump through hoops. The power that the government has to fight a lawsuit is immense. And here we are, little David versus Goliath group, compared to all of that, trying to find some lawyers that'll work cheap and finding some legal interns and some helper and some staff. And most of us doing all this work, massive amounts of work and research. And part of it had to do with correcting the historical record. The previous laws that were passed were based on actual inaccuracies about the history of our country. For example, that they have prayed since the founding of our country. And we had to go to great lengths to prove that, in fact, during the Constitutional Convention, there were no prayers. There were no official prayers. Benjamin Franklin asked for it, but he was not even seconded. It was embarrassing. And Justice Jay, who later became, Jay, who was in the Constitutional Convention, later became Supreme Court Justice. He said, we can't have a prayer at the Constitutional Convention because we all disagree on these things. How are we going to get together and agree on the prayer? Let's leave it out of our government. That was smart. Let the government be neutral and let people pray as they want to. We had to correct some of those myths. Another myth that they've been putting forward is that every single president has done this proclaimed days of prayer, which is not true. Jefferson explicitly refused to do that. And Madison, during the war, was forced. He felt pressured to proclaim a day of Thanksgiving and prayer, but he later said that was a mistake. It was like a wartime thing that he had to do. He was opposed to paid chaplains. He was opposed to all of that. And Jackson did not proclaim a day of prayer or any of that. So we had to go into a lot of work in the historical record and then in the modern record, proving the divisiveness of such a thing, proving that, in fact, Jews have been frozen out, and non-Christians and non-evangelical Christians, newspaper stories, clips and all that. And the government, with all of their attorneys and staff and all that, were asking for every single possible little record that we had of anything. We had to produce documents and how many pennies we spent on this, how much time did I spend talking about this with so-and-so, all of this stuff, every single email that I might have sent to maybe some of you that discusses the National Day of Prayer. And they came and they deposed Annie Laurie Gaylor. They put her through this long, hour-long bright light kind of thing, and she said, I'm very sensitive to light. Can you turn that bright light off? They videotaped her having a deposition about how she first heard about it and why does it bother us and what's the problem with it and, what does it hurt, all of that. We filed the lawsuit. It was decided on April the 15th, as I already told you. A federal judge, Barbara Crabb in Wisconsin. And by the way, when you sue the federal government, you can sue in any one of the federal courts in the country. So it was just a half a block away from us is where her office is, which is nice. In fact, somebody joked that we should get an office next to hers with one of those little mail slots, that we can just put in a lawsuit and then she'll stick out a decision. And she has been good to us in the past. She's also ruled against us in the past. She's a fair judge. And in her decision, which you're welcome to read, it's a good lesson on state-church separation, her decision. We disagree with much of her decision. She actually thinks under God and the Pledge is okay. She actually thinks in God we trust is okay. There's a lot of things that she thinks, what she calls our accommodation and acknowledgement. She thinks that the United States government can acknowledge and accommodate religion. In fact, even many of us atheists think there's a place for accommodating or acknowledging religion as long as it doesn't go too far. But Justice Crabb said, proclaiming a National Day of Prayer crosses the line. It's good for our case that she was not anti-religious. In fact, she even says in her decision, prayer might be a good thing for the country. Prayer might be really what's needed for America, but it crosses the line when our president proclaims it and calls on Americans to pray. Americans should be free to pray on their own. I was on Fox TV about a month ago on Mother's Day. Was that? Yeah, about a month ago on Mother's Day. And since it was a weekend, they didn't have their big guns. There was this young guy, I forget his name, David. Anyway, it was an early Sunday morning show. And they should fire the guy because he was really good. Fox TV, you know, is known for their right-wing slant and all that. And he let me speak in complete sentences. And usually they interrupt and they browbeat. And he made an obvious mistake. He started off by saying, well, Dan, America is clearly a Christian nation. It says in our Constitution that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And those of you who are from the United States might recognize the mistake there, right? Because where does it say that phrase? Not in the Constitution. It says it in the Declaration of Independence, when we had to split off from those oppressive British. And I corrected him on the air, and to his credit, he looked down and he says, yes, you're right. Yeah, I was wrong about that. So can you imagine that? In any event, there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people on the religious right are spreading this misinformation and all these facts about the founding of our country. So read Barbara Crabb's decision. She was sober, and it looks to us like she was tailoring it for the Seventh Circuit, anticipating, which she was right to do, that this decision would be appealed. And at the end of the decision, she said it is unconstitutional. The President of the United States is enjoined from issuing a proclamation of prayer. And I mean, it's not every day that a group like ours can enjoin the President of the United States from doing something. However, she said the injunction will take effect after all appeals are exhausted, which meant that the following first Thursday of May, which was it the 7th this year or the 6th this year, Obama went ahead and did it.